Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward, and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week is Ross Memphis Pambrun. Memphis is a proud Métis business owner, sought-after speaker, former fire chief, and host of the television series Red River Gold. He's also a musician, podcaster, and the CEO of the Memphis Group, an artificial intelligence company that protects communities from environmental threats. Memphis, thanks so much for joining us on the show this week.
Thank you, Dennis. That was a big, heavy lift there when you came to sort of describing who I am.
Right. Well, it is a heavy lift. Like you heard there, you're a pretty eclectic guy who has quite the distinguished career spanning artificial intelligence, Indigenous awareness, emergency services, and we're going to get into all of that. But I guess your story really starts overseas. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So my father was a Canadian soldier, coming out of Saskatchewan, and he happened to meet a beautiful woman, my mother. She was from Saskatoon. And as the journey for them began, Dad was posted overseas. So my brother and sister ended up being posted over, and eventually, all of a sudden, there comes Ross. So I was born over in Germany, and I got a number of experiences while we were there, but it was very young. So when we came back to Canada, we lived all over Canada. That was just the nature of being an army brat, following a soldier who's been posted all over Canada. And I've loved living in the East, but I sure love living out West.
Right. Like you say, your dad is a retired Sergeant Major George Pambrun, a decorated soldier who's played a big role in the lifting up and recognizing of Indigenous soldiers back in Canada. You would later don a uniform of another kind. Did your dad's service have a role in you getting into emergency services?
Absolutely. And I think my brother and sister as well. So all three of them are Aboriginal veterans. And my father did sort of serve at the National Board for Veterans. And I never understood the nature of medals. I never understood the nature of service when I was growing up. But through my many years when I became a professional firefighter, and I think in a way I was sort of chasing a little bit of the calling that my brother had done. He was a firefighter. He had served. He'd spent some time over in Iraq. And when you look up to that older brother of yours, when he joined the fire department, he said, Ross, I think this would be something that would fit really well for you. And it took me many years, around 17 years, I was a lieutenant. And then they start giving you medals for your years of service, one with the city of Calgary, one with the province of Alberta. And recently I just received a federal medal from Canada for my years of service. But I never understood why they gave me medals until one time I was participating at an Indigenous youth event. And this young fella came up and he saw me and I was wearing my uniform. And he said, "What do you do?" And I had my fire department #1 uniform on. And I said, "Well, you know what? I help put out fires and I get people out of car accidents." And he said, "But yeah, what do you really do?" And you don't often get that second question. I said, "Well, we inspect businesses, we test equipment, we teach our youth. That's our responsibility." And he took a second, he looked at me and he said, "What do you really do?" Dennis, I'd never been asked that question before. And it was at that moment I thought I have to be as honest as I can. This is the youth asking questions. This is what you live your life for, is to eventually provide that wisdom. And I took a second and I took a deep breath and I said, "You know what I do?" I said, "I send people into harm's way to save somebody else's life. These are calculated decisions within seconds. And I have to live with the consequences of my decisions." And he looked at me and he turned and he smiled and he walked away and he said, I could never do that. But it was at that moment I realized why they gave us medals of service. It's for that sacrifice that we make. It's for the sacrifice that our families make when we go to participate, whether it's as soldiers, whether it's first responders, whether it's within our community. It helped me recognize that. And that was a very, very important time in my life.
Yeah, a difficult job indeed. Like you say, other members of your family also served. Was there something that kept you from serving?
I took the opportunity for a bit of education. And my dad had said to me at one point, he said, "Listen, if you don't have a job in the summertime, you will be a reservist." But it worked out that I ended up having some great opportunities. I had some educational opportunities. And then the next thing you know, all of a sudden I was transitioning to where I had a journey within as a registered nurse. And I worked in the ICUs and the CCUs at the Royal Alex in Edmonton, and I took my advanced critical care studies. So my journey became education. And that's the one thing that I continue to say. And that's one of my big statements is always be learning. And in fact, I'm taking courses all the time. Just the other day, I was working on one at the Alan Turing Institute about artificial intelligence. How do we get people to understand, participate? So that for me, I came to learn that with the service that I've done now for over 25 years with the city of Calgary, it's been that journey where I feel like I've really given back. And I want to continue to give back.
Nice stuff. We're going to get into all of your entrepreneurial work, but did you always have that drive for business as well?
I think the drive became the challenge. That's the part that I've always thrived on. I'm the first person to say when somebody says, "Who wants to try this?" I'll put my hand up. And that's one thing that I teach our youth now. Always participate. So opportunities sort of abounded for me when I said, well, I'd be interested in learning a little bit more about this. So built an occupational health company, sold that nationally, had somebody reach out to me saying, well, some of the work we've been doing has been with machine learning and artificial intelligence. And I thought to myself, okay, where can we strengthen our community? And one of my partners came to me and said, how about if we develop a machine learning tool to protect our environments from wildfire? Ross, we live in this world of wildfires. This is one of our biggest threats. So I reached out to one of my government agencies and said, here's what we would like to do. And they said, you found a gap in the environmental sciences. Yes, we want you to pursue this. And then all of a sudden it became another business opportunity. And what I really try to tout when I talk to people is the more times you put your hand up, as you surround yourself with great people with great ideas, the most amazing things happen. And because of that, I had a podcast where I was talking about Indigenous conversations. Because of that, one of the directors who I was working with there called me up one day and he said, Ross, do you want to search for lost gold in Manitoba from the 1800s? And I said, Saxon, I'll have my bags packed and be ready to go in an hour. Now, it doesn't quite work like that when you get on TV, but what I came to learn was this huge collision of who Ross Pambrun was, whether it was Ross Pambrun doing science, whether it was Ross Pambrun as a firefighter, whether it was Ross Pambrun as an actor, whether it was Ross Pambrun as a podcaster or as a musician. People want to celebrate those opportunities. And as that opens the door to conversation, the next thing you know, you're on face-to-face on APTN.
Right. Well, the first time I spoke with you was when you were about to, Red River Gold was about to air. And as soon as we were done, I was like, oh man, that Memphis, he's a talker. And, like you mentioned, you're a podcaster, musician, a sought-after speaker. Have you always felt comfortable as a public speaker?
Well, I love that question. And going back to one of your original comments about where I commented about being an Army brat, one of the hardest things about being the son of a soldier is as you move to a new community, you start over with new friends. Mm-hmm. Now, the world has changed because it's a little easier for us to stay in touch because of all the social media that's out there. But at the time that I was growing up, the only way you were going to stay in touch was you wrote a letter, or you tried to pick up the phone and make the occasional phone call. But as we moved around, every time I had to meet new people. Mm-hmm. And I've still lived my life like that. I'm always a little worried that I'm going to lose a friend for some reason. That's just the nature of being an Army brat. But what I've come to realize is that when you're the first person to put your hand out and say, well, it's nice to meet you, somebody's always willing to reach back. And then the stories get shared. And then again, somebody says, hey, tell me a little bit about yourself. And the first thing I say is, that's a very loaded question because there's a lot going on in my life right now, and I am living my best life. And then they go, how could I do that? And I said, that's the one question you got to answer for yourself. But when you get there, you're going to have realized it's worth the journey.
Yeah. What are some of the messages that you like to bring to your public speaking?
So the Speakers Bureau of Canada had reached out to me because they saw that I was giving talks about Indigenous awareness and that conversation about challenges around it and bringing down the fear of some of the words that we're all afraid to say. And after I gave my talk, they came up to me and they said very generously, you are an amazing speaker. And again, I've been on stages as a musician and giving these talks for a long time. And I said, yeah, but the most important thing for me is that I continue at the end of every one of these conversations, always be learning, always be sharing, always be talking, and always be listening. If you do those four things and it's authentic, if you're having authentic conversations, just like the amazing questions that you asked, Dennis, that is what opens the dialogue. That's how we have to talk.
Well, Memphis, we're going to talk a lot more, especially about some of that work around AI. We just need to step aside for a quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face. Stick around. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is musician, entrepreneur, and much more, Ross Memphis Pambrun. And Ross, Memphis, let's talk about your work with artificial intelligence, which, we were talking off screen, I think scares a lot of people, and a lot of people think it's amazing and the future, depending on the line of work you're in. I guess I kind of know which camp you fall into there.
Well, that is true. I know where you think you're headed with that one, but I often use the phrase, if you don't participate, artificial intelligence will define you. But here's the caveat that I always make with that. You get to control how you participate. Because here's what happens, and this is one of the most important things I'm going to say today, and if people write this down, this is exactly what they should write on their arm. If you're using it for free, then you are the product. Think about that. Every social media product that's out there, every time you type into Google, nobody out there pays for Google. They might pay for a little bit of storage, but if you think that you're the one who's all of a sudden paying and you have complete privacy online, it doesn't work like that. So when it comes to the tools of artificial intelligence, if we don't have people participate and say, this is what's happening within my Indigenous community. These are what the elders have been saying. This is the information that's true about our community. If we don't share that information, all of a sudden AI is going to look back to old information that's been historically written colonially and say, okay, I think this is what the truth is. No. So as we validate our own information, I also lead into the nature of data sovereignty. Again, when you put it on social media, you've given it away. Right. But if we have our communities that start to build the repertoire of our information, as we build data centers that have information that is being controlled, stored under the Indigenous community banner, then we get to control the narrative that goes out there. And when somebody comes to us, like one of the big, suppliers, the internet providers, all the language providers saying, we really want to engage with your community more. Sure. But here's how that relationship is going to go forward. That's why we need people to participate. So when it's your time to put up your hand, say, okay, but who am I doing this for? Am I doing this for my community, or am I just doing this for a business that wants to take this information? So I'm very, very aware of what is called the social progress of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, data sovereignty, a huge thing. I guess for myself as somebody in news, some of the things that concern me are fake photos, fake videos, fake stories in news all in general. What do you see as some of the concerns around AI?
That is a well-shaped question. I gave a talk recently in Saskatoon, and the gentleman who invented Siri, Adam Chair, wanted to meet me. He said, Ross, he came up to me and he said, I think you're the best speaker in Canada. And I nearly fell over. This guy invented Siri. When he sold it to Steve Jobs, one of the conversations that he had with Steve Jobs was, why are you wanting to purchase this? And Steve Jobs says, because I want a technology and a tool that brings people together. But there's an inherent fear that's occurring when it comes to the idea of what these technologies are doing. But remember, it's people who are shaping these fears. It's people who are taking advantage of other individuals. So the nature of deepfakes, and I get this every time I come off of a big stage. Somebody comes up to me and says, I have a family member, and it's usually a teenager that's been deepfaked. They've accidentally sent an inappropriate picture of themselves to somebody who ends up being what we call a threat actor. And now somebody's trying to use that in order to blackmail them, to try and ransom them. They're trying to get information, power. This is a power control thing. And I explain to people, we're never going to get away from the challenges of people creating fear. But what we do have when it comes to the narrative of deepfakes is we're in a space right now that it's so hard to believe or control the information that I try to teach our youth. I understand we make mistakes, but your response when anybody ever asks you, is this you? Is A, it's none of your business. And B, what makes you think that would be me in the world of technology today, even if it is, and turn and walk away. We need to teach our youth how to protect themselves because the internet isn't there to try and protect you. That's my biggest fear.
Yeah. Lately, it seems like it's trying to make things a lot worse. How did you get yourself involved with AI?
When I was developing the technology within the Memphis group in order to do environmental monitoring, what we learned was, and I'll try and simplify it, but there's this wonderful little shrimp on the walks along the ocean floor, and it's called a mantis shrimp. Now you and I see typically red, blue, and green, and from those three colors, we can extrapolate all the colors of the rainbow, and our brains can use that information. But this little mantis shrimp can see the entire visual spectrum, ultraviolets, infrareds, thermal, but its brain is so small, the only thing it knows is what it needs to eat or what's going to eat it. So as I look back at the Earth through the same visual spectrum of that little mantis shrimp, now we take that information and use the brains of computers to help us identify where are the greatest threats within our communities. That could be water, that could be fire, that could be noxious weeds, right? The changes for where animal movements happen. So a project that I'm trying to assist one of our agencies with is retranslocating animals back into their natural habitats overseas. So imagine that, an animal that may have been hunted and to extinction, but there's still a volume of population of those animals available. What if we can put them back into that native habitat and all of a sudden, rebuild that community? So those are just some of the tools that we try to use when it comes to this technology. But that's just it. We're using new ideas that weren't there before. We're looking at the earth in a very different way, in a way we weren't looking at it before. That's how we have to use these tools. And when it comes to the idea of like our members of our communities who lead great conversations like our journalists, there's an intuition that doesn't occur with artificial intelligence. And I try to explain in the simple terms, every one of us has a brain. Well, think about artificial intelligence. It's essentially one brain. Now, we think to ourselves, okay, what if we connect 1 million different brains? Yeah, imagine how hard that is to understand, how complicated that is to understand. So we're not going to get there, but we need the intuition of somebody like yourself who has the experience. How do I have a conversation? AI struggles with that.
Right. Well, again, Memphis, we're going to continue the conversation here. We just have to step out for one last break, and then we'll keep the conversation going here on Face to Face. Stick around. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Ross Memphis Pambrun, and we've been talking about AI. And Memphis, you're also the CEO of the Memphis group that is using AI, I guess, to try and help with the wildfire situation. Can you tell us how that might come together?
So, a business partner of mine who also works in the world of protecting communities said, we've been building some products that are machine learned, which is one of the subsets of artificial intelligence. He said, but one of the things that we're lacking is using this machine learning to continually monitor through remote sensing, for example, which might be the first house to burn down in a community if a wildfire starts. So we talked about it and we built algorithms that helped us understand if the wind is blowing from the south to the north and a fire was to start in the south, and this one specific house at the bottom of a community had wood or shake shingles versus a metal roof, which house might burn down faster? Now, when you train a tool, when you train an AI machine learning tool, and it all of a sudden starts looking at all the houses in a community, and now you say to it, how about this? I'm also going to look at the communities in Ontario. Oh, I'm going to look at the communities in British Columbia. And it shows us here are the greatest areas of threat. Now, when we give that information and say, here's what you can do to protect your community, that is what AI technologies and machine learning should be doing. But it still requires the intuition of the people who are actually working with the knowledge to come up with the strategies, because there's a lot of impacts when it comes to that.
Memphis, I feel like we could talk for hours and hours about AI, and you might still not get me to understand it, but did want to talk a bit about the show that you were part of this past year, and that's Red River Gold, and maybe just a little how you came to be part of that show.
So I started a podcast a number of years ago called The Squeaky Wheel, and it was about conversation within the Indigenous communities, but outside of the Indigenous communities. And then we took it to another level where it became a bit of a variety show. And one of the directors that I worked with, Saxon DeCock with 3 Story Pictures, reached out to me one day going, have you heard about the story of the lost gold along the Dawson Trail in Manitoba? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I spent a number of my formative years growing up in Winnipeg. I said, so I'm a bit familiar with the tale. But I said, what are you interested in doing? And he goes, as far as he's concerned, and as far as we're concerned, as far as the Royal Mint in London is concerned, that gold is still out there. And he said, Ross, do you want to put a team of gold hunters together and go search for it? And the next thing you know, folks, I'm on Red River Gold. Season 1 has probably come to an end. I know it's just came out in Métis. The show was sold internationally. We were nominated for 5 awards this year. Best host, Dennis, I still can't explain that one, but somebody must have didn't come to their senses on that one. Best new show, and season 2's coming out, if it's not out, right away. But as a host of a TV show, it's my responsibility to be still very engaged in that conversation. But as an actor, I'm also still, other things are still happening when it comes to the work that I'm doing. But we should be filming season 3 fairly shortly.
Awesome stuff. I guess just anything that really stuck out for you from the filming of the shows? The challenges. I work with some great hosts, Goldie and Eric. They're sort of my 2 team partners who have been building the repertoire of our gear and our equipment and helping understand where we're going to search. I use technology to help me understand the route that we're going to search. But folks, we're in boats, planes, trains, automobiles. It seems like everything's happening. We're using every opportunity. In fact, I was filming over in Cardiff recently. I had the opportunity to go to the London Mint because that's where the gold came from. We're not just telling a fun story that somebody may have made up. No. This gold was being shipped to put down Louis Riel and the Red River Resistance. It's to pay the soldiers, to stop the resistance. That gold went missing. So it's not only is it a fun story that's a challenge to tell, but we meet so many people in the community. I still get to play my instrument on there. I get to sing every now and then. I'm sitting around the campfire. We're faced with the challenges of, are we going to sink in the Caribou Bog? Are we going to get across that river? That's the challenge, and that's what makes the show exciting. Well, and all that is what makes you the hostess with the mostest, and all those accolades are certainly well-deserved. Really excited. There's a couple more seasons coming. Memphis, we'll have to leave it there, but like I said, we could talk for hours. Really appreciate you taking some time for us here this week.
Folks, thanks for watching the show. If you want to learn more, look up rosspambrun.ca. All the information's there. Thank you to APTN. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you to everybody in our community. It takes a community to build an artist, and this is an amazing community.
Indeed, I agree. Thanks again, Memphis. That is all the time we have for this week's show. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy Miigwech, thanks for being with us. We'll see you back here in 7 days.